Friends, welcome. This is the Frederick Henry Show, and I'm Frederick Henry. And today is the day after Easter, and I'm absolutely startled when you think about the Pope in Rome. Just as an example, the Pope in Rome speaking to an empty St. Peter's Basilica, with the outside empty of anybody. I mean, this is a huge event in the Christian Church. Usually thousands and tens of thousands of people are involved throughout the day, and yet the Pope spoke to an empty room. And this talks very much about what's happening in our world, that for whatever reason, the fear which has been instilled in people has produced such a shutdown of the worldwide society. It's not just the United States, it's the world. And throughout the world, a fear of a germ has been effective in shutting down society after society and nation after nation, and even to the point of church after church and synagogue after synagogue. And one has to ask the question, how is this possible? We've had pandemics before, we've had disasters before, we've had all kinds of issues, but somehow or other, forces, fear forces or whatever, I don't want to get overly into conspiracies, but one has to wonder, how in the world did we effectively shut down entire societies because of a virus? Let me just pause here a minute. And so when we ask the question, how is this possible? Well, I think the coronavirus happened. I think the spread of the virus happened. I think, however, also at the same time, once it was happening, that forces in the world, dark forces, forces of evil, forces of darkness, saw an opportunity. You know the old saying among the Democrats, don't let any opportunity go unwasted or any crisis unwasted. And so I think people saw an opportunity. We saw that in the Congress with Nancy Pelosi coming forward to try to get pet money for her, for Kennedy Center, for other Planned Parenthood, and especially to get universal mail-in balloting. She wanted to piggyback all these issues onto a bill which was meant to help the American people, figuring that, everybody's distracted, everybody's not paying attention, everybody is worried about themselves, and they're not going to oppose her from imposing these terrible, terrible things upon us by sneaking them in at the last minute in a crisis. And in that sense, I just want to call out my dear friends in the media, positively. I want to call them out with a positive compliment and encourage you to pay attention to them. Black-Conservative-Patriot, one of my favorite programs. Black-Conservative-Patriot can be found on YouTube. He has a wonderful program, daily program. He brings us a lot of information and gives us a lot of interpretation, which I think is very valid. Dan-bongno, the ex-Secret Service agent who has very, very deep knowledge of the inner workings of and behind-the-scenes working of the government, especially the White House and the Secret Service, brings us great insights. Laura Ingraham, a woman who asks the key questions and seems always to be one step ahead of people, was one of the very first people to bring up the hydroxychloroquine and one of the first people to start asking questions about the abridgment of our rights, and one of the first people to start saying, well, maybe Dr. Fauci isn't all he's intended to be, or he's not with it, or maybe he's old-fashioned. That's my opinion, by the way. I think people want to make Dr. Fauci like the devil, I don't know about that. It could be, he always goes to CNN and goes to MSNBC, and he allows them to ask him questions. Recently, I think today, the day after Easter, he was recorded as saying last week that in answer to a question, can you guarantee that American citizens will be allowed to have in-person voting in November federal election? And Fauci, a Democrat, a Hillary Clinton person, closely associated with the Clinton Foundation and with Bill Gates and all those guys, says, well, I can't guarantee that Americans, citizens, will have the ability to have in-person voting in November. Well, that's an innocuous statement. obviously you can't guarantee. You can't guarantee anything. Neither can I nor anybody else. You can't guarantee whether you're going to be alive tomorrow. You can't guarantee a lot of stuff. And so it was a gotcha question, and he answered it in a particular way. He could have said, well, that's an inappropriate question, or he could have said, I don't really have the answer to that, or that's up to the political establishment, not to me. But he said, well, he doesn't, and right away you have this fluttering on Twitter, and it's possible. It's possible. I've done a podcast on, is Fauci part of a conspiracy? I think probably not, but he does betray his true color, which is Democrat, his true politics, Democrat, and I think he would like very much to do all that he can to prevent Donald Trump from being reelected the President of the United States. That's my opinion. And so, why are we even paying attention to Fauci? I mean, he had the wrong model, him and Dr. Birx. He had the wrong information. He had the wrong data. He had the wrong conclusions. Now, he works with a policy board under Vice President Pence. He does have to listen to many other doctors, but his persistent narrow-mindedness and his persistent focus on old-fashioned thinking and old-fashioned data and old-fashioned methodologies and old-fashioned everything. It seems to indicate that this fellow was past his prime. He's been in a political office in terms of the CDC and elsewhere too long. He probably doesn't do all that much research anymore anyway, and he's being challenged successfully, I think, by younger and brighter and more contemporary modern medical minds and research minds to change his viewpoint. And so we had yesterday, I think, a word of hope from the president. I happened to just open up my computer and I saw this statement, the president saying to the hospitals, get ready, big things are happening, get your room in order, get your supplies in order, get your staff in order, get your processes in order, don't linger, don't stall, and most certainly get a lot of face masks, Now, why do I think that's significant? I think the president's tweet about face masks is his telling us ahead of time what's going to happen. I think the president has a habit of doing that. I think he gives us a clue into his thinking. He gives us a clue into his goal. He sends us messages in various and sundry ways to tell us what's going to happen, all things being equal. Now, all things are not always equal. You know that. It's a dynamic process. And governing and not ruling. He's not a ruler, and he doesn't intend to be a ruler. Not like the Democrat governors and councilmen and mayors are rulers and monarchs and all that kind of stuff. Queen Nancy Pelosi and King Chuck Schumer. Ridiculous. But anyway, the president foreshadows what's going to happen. I think he said it in the very beginning when he said that I hope that churches will be full on Easter. And he reiterated that about 10 days ago, that he was very saddened that the churches were not going to be full on Easter. And that was not only a religious statement, because he is a Christian and he is a practicing Christian, but it's also a statement of a message that he, from his input that he's getting, from the data he's reading, from the reports he's receiving, from the advice of other counselors than Fauci, this thing should run its major course by Easter. Now, when he said that, he was poo-pooed, he was mocked, it's so common, the mainstream media doing that to him. But he was projecting, he's trying to give people an idea, a goal, a focus, and to hold out hope and possibility to people that Easter is going to be the time of change. I think yesterday's message about face masks comes to the population. If we read it, I read it to say that, listen, we're not going to be able to continue social distancing. Think of it, folks. 6 feet apart, 8 feet apart, no groups larger than 10. How can you run a factory? How can you run a warehouse? How can you run an airline? How can you run an airport? How can you run a train station? How can you run anything if everybody has to be 6 feet apart? It's undoable. And so while the medical people and their followers and the mainstream media press want to emphasize that, it could be interpreted that they know that you cannot function as a society with everybody standing 6 feet apart. And so the president realizes that, and I think that he's begun to say, we're going to now move into the masks. We finally have moved out. Remember in the beginning they said, well, Fauci and his people said, oh, this is not a big deal. Nobody should worry about it. Look on the Twitter. Look on the internet. You'll see all of Fauci's statements way back in February and first weeks in February. We don't have to be overly concerned. Cuomo made a lot of mistakes. De Blasio usually made mistakes. Many of the governors were more prudent and took less strident steps early on, but now many governors are taking much stronger steps and a little late, but also wrong kinds of steps, like closing down worship and shutting down centers of spiritual renewal and hope on Easter. Terrible, terrible things. Now, of course, my telling you this about masks could be counterproductive. I went on Amazon yesterday, Easter Sunday, and looked at the masks. Most of them are selling for $1.50 a piece, when they should be selling for about 40 cents a piece. And there's limited quantities, and when we tried to order, one particular one we chose is throwaway masks, good ones, at $1 a piece, so we found some for $1 a piece. They wouldn't be able to be delivered to our home until like the 25th of May, much too long to wait. And so my wife and I are in the process of using stuff that we have in the house, T-shirts and other cotton materials, handkerchiefs, bandanas, to make face masks, or just to wear a bandana. But, one of the big things, by the way, about face masks is they have to be worn correctly. My daughter, who's an RN in New Jersey, told me that the other day when she was out, everybody in the store that she was visiting was wearing the face mask over the mouth but below the nose. They didn't cover their noses. And they said that they were told that's the way you wear it. Well, that's not the way you wear it. You have to wear a face mask over your nose and mouth, and it has to be relatively closed in on all sides. Now, I know from my own experience that it's not the easiest thing to breathe inside of a face mask. However, I would make a suggestion that if you do use a face mask, learn how to breathe through your nose. A lot of people are mouth breathers. They breathe through their mouth, and that's their fallback, or the way in which they breathe. They can breathe through their nose. That's what the nose is there for. And it will decrease the amount of intake if you use your nose, because your mouth is sucking in and out of the mask and degrading the mask. Your nose will do a better job. Just practice how to breathe through your nose, because that's going to be very important in wearing face masks if it becomes considered not mandatory, because you can't force anybody, even though the police are trying to arrest people who don't wear face masks. By the way, folks, all of this arresting and handcuffing and ticketing and in Kentucky, and $500 fines for going to church in your car and staying in your car and staying 3 car. Cars were parked 3 car spaces away from each other. The people in the cars stayed inside the cars and did not get out of the cars. The pastor stood out in the open air, away from the windows, away from the cars, and 20 police cars surrounded the church and gave each one of those attending that service a $500 fine. That's in Kentucky. The Kentucky Governor Beshear was elected. I come from Kentucky. Beshear was elected because the teachers were angry at his predecessor. There was a teacher strike. The predecessor forced him to go back to work, and he didn't have kind words for the teachers. The teachers, don't forget, most of them are women, most of them have husbands, most of them have relatives and friends, had a fit about this. And when I was voting, I thought the turnout was very heavy, and it was, because the teachers had mobilized, and the teachers' unions had mobilized, and the anger and fury which was seething in Kentucky over the not nice statements of the governor about teachers produced Beshear. And now Beshear is closing churches, threatening to close gun stores, and fining people $500 for going to church in their car, staying in their car, and the like more. Just a terrible thing. So, watch out what your anger produces. Even on our side, we say we're angry at the liberals, or we're angry at this one. Let's not be angry. Let's be smarter. Let's not be angry and furious and have a rage. Let's be smarter and calmer and more focused, and emphasis upon making sure that President Trump gets reelected, emphasis upon making sure that the House of Representatives is returned to a Republican speaker, emphasis on increasing our majority